March 17, 1945. Allied Supreme Headquarters Forward Command Post, Reims, France. Winston Churchill sits alone in his private quarters, reading casualty reports by lamplight. A cigar rests between his fingers. The smoke rises slowly in the still air. Outside, the war grinds toward its final act. Inside, Churchill calculates losses. British, American, Canadian, French. Every name represents a family that will never be whole again. Then the door bursts open. No knock, no warning. Churchill's chief of staff stands in the doorway. His Prime Minister, he says, his voice tight. We have a situation. Churchill looks up. His chief of staff never interrupts like this, never. General Patton just called Field Marshal Montgomery Timid at a press conference. In front of 40 war correspondents in Koblenz. It's already on the wires. Churchill's cigar stops halfway to his mouth. He said, "What? If you're fascinated by the untold stories of World War II, the conflicts behind the conflicts, the moments that nearly tore the Allied alliance apart, then you need to subscribe to WW2 Elite right now. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and drop a comment telling me which World War II commander you want to hear about next. Let's dive into one of the most explosive confrontations of the entire war." The Chief of Staff crosses the room and places the telegram on Churchill's desk. Churchill reads it once, then again. His jaw tightens. "Get me the transcript," Churchill says. "Every word. It's already been read on BBC Home Service, sir. Reuters picked it up within the hour." Churchill sets the cigar down. He knows what this means. Montgomery will have heard it by now. The British press will have it by morning. The public will be outraged. And the alliance, the fragile, hard-won coalition that has held together through 5 years of bloodshed, might not survive the week. "Montgomery will have heard it by now then," Churchill says quietly. "Field Marshal Montgomery's headquarters called 12 minutes ago, sir. He's demanding Patton's immediate removal from command." Churchill closes his eyes. He can already see the headlines. He can already hear the questions in Parliament. How can we trust the Americans when their generals insult ours in public? How can British soldiers follow orders when their commanders are mocked by their allies? That's impossible, Churchill says. Eisenhower would never relieve Patton. Not this close to victory. The Chief of Staff hesitates. Then he says the words that change everything. "Apparently, sir, this is the third such incident in 2 months." Churchill looks up sharply. "What did you say?" "The third incident, sir. We've been tracking it. Patton has been making comments about the Field Marshal since December." And that's when Churchill learned exactly how long Patton and Montgomery had been at each other's throats, and how close the alliance was to shattering just weeks before victory. Let's go back 6 hours. Koblenz, Germany, 2:30 in the afternoon. Lieutenant General George S. Patton stands at a makeshift podium in a requisition. His Third Army has just accomplished something extraordinary. They've crossed the Rhine River at Oppenheim, reaching Hitler's last natural barrier in the west. 40 war correspondents crowd the room. Notebooks open, cameras ready. This is the kind of story that wins Pulitzer Prizes. An American correspondent from Stars and Stripes raises his hand. "General Patton, Field Marshal Montgomery's Operation Plunder is scheduled for next week. A massive assault across the Rhine with 250,000 troops. Can you comment on the difference in approach?" Patton smiles. It's not a friendly smile. "I prefer aggressive action to timid planning," he says. "Third Army crossed the Rhine at Oppenheim last night with a single regiment and took 12 casualties. 12. That's how you win wars. By attacking, not by gathering supplies for 3 weeks." The room goes silent. Every correspondent in the room knows exactly what He didn't mention Montgomery by name. He didn't have to. Montgomery's Rhine crossing has been in the newspapers for weeks. The meticulous preparation, the massive build-up, the careful planning. Everyone knows who Patton is talking about. One British correspondent stands up. "General, are you suggesting Field Marshal Montgomery's approach is—" "I'm suggesting," Patton interrupts, "that there's more than one way to cross a river. I chose speed. The Field Marshal chose preparation. History will judge which approach saved more lives." The correspondent from Stars and Stripes, Jack Thompson, files his story at 3:15. By 3:30, it's on the wire services. By 4 o'clock, it's being read on BBC Home Service in London. By 4:15, Montgomery's headquarters is on the phone demanding Patton's head. Back in Reims, Churchill reads the full transcript. The numbers stare back at him from the page. Montgomery's Operation Plunder. 3 weeks of planning. 250,000 troops. 3,000 artillery pieces. projected casualties of 5,000 or more. Patton's crossing at Oppenheim. 24 hours notice. One regiment in the first wave. About 3,000 men, using assault boats at night. 12 casualties. Churchill does the math in his head. That's a 2,000 to 1 ratio, and Patton said this publicly, in front of 40 reporters, knowing it would reach Montgomery, knowing it would reach London, knowing what it would do to the alliance. "Get me a secure line to General Eisenhower," Churchill says. "Now." It's 4 o'clock in Reims, 10 o'clock in the morning in Washington. Eisenhower is at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, meeting with his staff, when an aide enters and whispers in his ear. Eisenhower's face goes pale. He excuses himself and takes the call in his private office. "Mr. Prime Minister," Eisenhower says. Churchill doesn't waste time on pleasantries. "Dwight, I've just been informed that one of your generals called my Field Marshal Timid in front of the press corps. I need hardly tell you the diplomatic catastrophe this represents. Montgomery is not merely a British commander. He is the face of British military pride to our people. Eisenhower has been dreading this call since the moment he heard about the press conference. Mr. Prime Minister, I've already drafted a reprimand, but I must point out that Patton was answering a direct question about tactics. He didn't mention Montgomery by name initially. He didn't need to." Churchill's voice rises. Everyone in that room knew exactly whom he meant. "Montgomery's Rhine crossing has been in the papers for weeks. This undermines British authority at the worst possible moment. What if our troops begin questioning their commanders?" Eisenhower takes a breath. He's been managing the Patton-Montgomery feud for months, and it's become the most exhausting part of his command. "With respect, sir, Third Army just accomplished something extraordinary. Patton crossed the Rhine with minimal casualties while Montgomery is still positioning his forces." The correspondents asked him to explain the difference in approach. What was he supposed to say? There's a long pause on the line. When Churchill speaks again, his voice is quieter, more personal. "Dwight, you and I have worked too hard, sacrificed too much to let personal rivalries destroy this alliance. I'm not asking you to fire Patton. I'm asking you to control him. Montgomery is threatening to resign if Patton isn't disciplined. You know what that would do to morale and to the history books." Eisenhower closes his eyes. He knows Churchill is right. But he also knows that Patton, for all his faults, is winning the war faster than anyone else. "I'll handle it, sir. But I want you to know Patton may be difficult, but he wins. And right now, winning is what matters." Churchill, he turns to his chief of staff, who's been waiting by the door. "Send word to Montgomery. Tell him I'm handling this personally. And get me everything. Every incident. Every insult, every grievance between those two. I need to understand how we got here." 30 minutes later, the chief of staff returns with a file. It's not thick. It's massive. Transcripts, reports, intercepted conversations, witness statements from staff officers. Churchill opens it and starts reading. What he finds shocks him. December 1940-4, Patton, at a dinner with American correspondents, called Montgomery a tired little fart who won't fight unless he has a 2-to-1 advantage and air superiority. January 1945, Patton tells war correspondents that British troops need an American push to get moving, and that Monty wouldn't attack if Hitler personally invited him. February 1945, a recorded phone conversation between Patton and Omar Bradley. Patton says Montgomery couldn't lead a squad of Boy Scouts across a village green without a 3-week planning session. Churchill reads it all. Then he reads it again. This isn't a single incident. This is a pattern. This is a vendetta. The next morning, March 18th, Field Marshal Alan Brooke, Chief of the Imperial General Staff, the highest-ranking officer in the British Army, arrives at Churchill's office at 8 o'clock. He's carrying a file folder 3 inches thick. He doesn't sit down. He walks straight to Churchill's desk and slams the folder down. "Prime Minister, this isn't an isolated incident. This is a pattern." Brooke opens the folder. Inside are more transcripts, more reports, more evidence of Patton's contempt for Montgomery. But there's also something else. Evidence of how the feud is affecting the alliance. British liaison officers requesting transfers from Third Army. British troops questioning why they're taking orders coordinated with American forces. Morale reports from 21st Army Group showing declining confidence in Allied unity. Either Patton goes, or Montgomery does, Brooke says flatly. "We cannot have both." Churchill looks at the file. Then he looks at Brooke. "If Montgomery resigns, what happens to 21st Army Group?" "Chaos," Brooke says. "Monty has been with those men since El Alamein. They trust him. If he leaves because an American general insulted him and nothing was done about it, British morale collapses. And if British morale collapses, the alliance collapses. Churchill knows Brooke is right, but he also knows that firing Patton would create an equal disaster on the American side. Patton is a hero to the American public. His Third Army has advanced farther and faster than any other Allied force. If Roosevelt, or now Truman, fires Patton to appease the British, American public opinion could turn against the alliance. I need to think, Churchill says, but he doesn't get the chance. March 19th, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The situation reaches President Harry S. Truman's desk. Truman has been president for less than a month, since Roosevelt's death on April 12th. Since Roosevelt's death the previous April. He's still finding his footing. And now, this. Truman reads Churchill's formal cable requesting Patton's relief for conduct unbecoming an Allied officer. He reads Eisenhower's report on the press conference. He reads the intelligence summary showing that German propagandists are already broadcasting news of the American-British split, claiming the alliance is crumbling. Truman picks up the phone. Get me General Marshall. General George C. Marshall, Army Chief of Staff, the most respected military leader in America, takes the call immediately. Mr. Halland, President. George, I've got Churchill asking me to fire Patton, Eisenhower asking me to let him handle it, and the Germans broadcasting that we're tearing ourselves apart. What am I supposed to do? Marshall doesn't hesitate. Tell Eisenhower he's the supreme commander. But make it clear, if this reaches Congress, if American mothers start asking why their sons are dying while Allied generals argue in the press, we'll all be answering very difficult questions. Truman hangs up and sends the order, resolve the Patton-Montgomery situation immediately. The president will not tolerate Allied disunity becoming front-page news. 20 minutes later, Marshall calls Eisenhower directly. Fix this, Ike. I don't care how. But if this reaches Congress, you'll be explaining why we're losing the peace before we've even won the war. Eisenhower hangs up the phone and sits in silence. He's commanded millions of men through the worst conflict in human history. He's coordinated invasions across 3 continents. He's managed coalitions, logistics, strategy, and diplomacy. But managing Patton and Montgomery might be the hardest thing he's ever done. He picks up the phone again. Get me General Patton and Field Marshal. Tell them to report to Chef Headquarters in Reims on March 21st at 10 a.m. Both of them, in person. His aide's voice is uncertain. Sir, are you sure that's... Do it, Eisenhower says, and notified Prime Minister Churchill. Tell him I'm handling this personally. But what Churchill didn't know yet was that Patton had said something even worse, something that hadn't made it into the official transcript. One of the correspondents at the press conference, off the record, had asked Patton if he thought Montgomery was afraid of casualties. Patton's response, never published, never reported, Monty's not afraid of casualties, he's afraid of responsibility. He'd rather let someone else take the risks and then take the credit. And while Churchill was trying to contain the diplomatic damage, Montgomery was planning something that would humiliate Patton in front of the entire Allied command. Montgomery's Chief of Staff, Freddie de Guindon, later recalled that Montgomery spent 2 days preparing a written list of Patton's insubordinations, 23 separate incidents, complete with dates, witnesses, and documentation. Montgomery intended to present it at the meeting as evidence that Patton was unfit for command. Within 48 hours, this feud would explode into something far bigger, a confrontation that would force Eisenhower to make one of the hardest decisions of the war. March 21st, 1945. Chef Headquarters, Reims. The entire Allied command structure holds its breath. This is the first time Patton and Montgomery will be in the same room since the press conference. Security is doubled. Eisenhower's staff is terrified the 2 generals might actually come to blows. Montgomery's aide reports that Monty spent the entire flight from Brussels preparing his list of grievances. 23 separate incidents of Patton undermining British authority, insulting British commanders, and violating the spirit of Allied cooperation. Patton's driver tells Third Army staff that Patton loaded his pearl-handled revolvers before leaving. When asked why, Patton said, "Just in case." The driver wasn't sure if he was joking. Omar Bradley, commander of 12th Army Group, and the man who technically oversees Patton, tells his staff, "If this meeting goes wrong, we could lose both of them, and we need both to finish this war." British intelligence intercepts Nazi propagandists are having a field day. The American-British alliance is crumbling, one broadcast claims. Patton and Montgomery hate each other more than they hate the Reich. The coalition is collapsing from within. Eisenhower, waiting in his office for the meeting to begin, confides in his naval aide, Harry Butcher. Harry, I've commanded millions of men through the worst war in history, but I've never been more nervous than I am about this meeting. Churchill, who has flown in from London specifically for this confrontation, tells Field Marshal Alan Brooke, "If Patton walks into that room and insults Montgomery again, I won't be able to protect him. The British public is watching." Montgomery, in his quarters, tells his chief of staff, "Patton is a cowboy, but he's Eisenhower's cowboy. I don't expect justice. I expect theatre." 10 o'clock. The meeting room at chief headquarters. Eisenhower enters first, then Churchill, then Montgomery, in full dress uniform with every medal he's ever earned pinned to his chest. The room is silent. Everyone is waiting for Patton. Patton arrives exactly on time. He's wearing his uniform, his polished boots, his helmet with the 4 stars, and his revolvers. He walks into the room and stops. Montgomery stands. For 5 seconds, no one breathes. Then Montgomery extends his hand. He looks at Montgomery. He looks at Eisenhower and Churchill. The entire room is frozen. Then Patton steps forward and shakes Montgomery's hand. "Congratulations on your Rhine crossing, Field Marshal," Patton says. "I hear it's scheduled to be quite the spectacle." It's not an apology. It's barely civil. But it's not an insult either. Montgomery's jaw tightens, but he nods. "Thank you, General. I hear yours was quite efficient." Eisenhower gestures to the table. "Gentlemen, please sit." They sit. Eisenhower at the head of the table, Churchill to his right, Montgomery and Patton across from each other. The air in the room is thick enough to cut. Eisenhower doesn't waste time. "Gentlemen, we are here because personal animosity has become professional liability. George, your press conference was inappropriate. Monty, your demand for General Patton's relief was premature. We will resolve this now." Montgomery opens his fold. "General Patton publicly humiliated British arms in front of the world press. He called careful planning timid when in fact," Patton interrupts, "I called inaction timid. There's a difference. You spent 3 weeks preparing to cross a river I took in one night. Those are facts, not insults." Montgomery's voice rises. "Your crossing was a tactical probe with 1 regiment. Mine is a strategic invasion with 250,000 men. You're comparing a canoe trip to D-Day." Patton leans forward. "My canoe trip, as you call it, breached the Rhine with 12 casualties. How many do you expect to take? That's not the point. It's exactly the point. Wars are won by killing the enemy and preserving your own men. I did both. You're still planning." Eisenhower raises his hand. "Enough. Both of you. But Montgomery isn't finished. General Patton has a pattern of undermining British command. In December, he called me I called your tactics tired," Patton says. "And they are. You fight like it's 1918. Massive bombardment, overwhelming force, slow advance. That worked at El Alamein because Rommel was starving and out of fuel. It doesn't work against a prepared German defense. And your tactics?" Montgomery's voice is ice. "Reckless advances, unsecured flanks, supply lines stretched to breaking. You nearly lost Third Army at Bastogne because you were too far forward to be reinforced." "I saved Bastogne," Patton says quietly. "In 48 hours, you would have spent 2 weeks planning the relief and arrived to find the town in German hands." Churchill stands. The room goes silent. "Gentlemen, enough." He doesn't shout. He doesn't need to. His voice carries the weight of 5 years of war, of a nation that stood alone against Hitler, of countless nights spent wondering if Britain would survive to see the dawn. "General Patton, you are perhaps the finest attacking general in the American army. Field Marshal Montgomery, you are unquestionably the most methodical commander in British service. These are not contradictions. They are complementary strengths. But if you cannot set aside personal pride for professional duty, then neither of you deserves to command." Patton looks at Churchill. For once, he says nothing. "What would you have me do, Prime Minister?" Churchill walks to the map on the wall. He points to the Rhine, to the positions of 3rd Army and 21st Army Group, to the German forces still fighting, still killing, still dying. "I would have you remember who the enemy is, and I would have you understand that when you insult Montgomery's caution, you insult every British soldier who died because we didn't have enough bullets, enough tanks, enough men. We learned to be careful because we had to be. Your country's wealth allows you to be bold. Don't mistake our necessity for timidity." The room is silent. Churchill turns to Montgomery. "And Field Marshal, when you criticize General Patton's aggression, You ignore the fact that his Third Army has advanced farther and faster than any force in this war. His methods may be unorthodox, but they work. If you cannot respect that, you're letting pride blind you to reality. Eisenhower, George, you will issue a written apology to Field Marshal Montgomery and a clarification to the press corps. The statement will emphasize that you were describing tactical philosophy, not criticizing any individual commander. Patton's jaw tightens. For a long moment he says nothing, then, "And if I refuse?" The room goes cold. Eisenhower starts to speak, but Churchill raises a hand. Churchill walks to Patton's chair. He looks down at the general, this brilliant, abrasive, impossibly difficult man who has won battle after battle and alienated nearly everyone in the process. Then you will go down in history as the general who valued his ego more than victory. You will be remembered not for crossing the Rhine, but for dividing the alliance. And when schoolchildren read about World War II, they will learn that George Patton fought two enemies, the Germans and his friends. The words hang in the air. Patton stares at Churchill. No one moves, no one breathes. This wasn't a threat, it was historical prophecy. Churchill understood something fundamental about Patton. Legacy mattered more to him than rank, more than medals, more than even victory. Patton saw himself as a historical figure, a man who would be studied and remembered for centuries. Churchill spoke to the only authority Patton truly respected, future historians. It was the perfect psychological warfare against a man obsessed with his place in history. Patton looks at the table, then at Montgomery, then at Eisenhower. Finally, he looks back at Churchill. "I'll issue the statement." Churchill nods. "See that you do." Montgomery closes his folder. He doesn't look satisfied, but he doesn't argue. Eisenhower exhales for what feels like the first time in an hour. "Gentlemen, this meeting is concluded. General Patton, I expect the statement on my desk by tomorrow morning. Field Marshal Montgomery, I expect your acceptance of the apology by tomorrow afternoon. We have a war to win, let's remember that." The meeting ends. Patton and Montgomery leave separately. They don't speak. Churchill stays behind with Eisenhower. "That was closer than I'd like. It was closer than any of us realize," Churchill replies. "But it's over now, is it?" Churchill looks at the map, at the thin lines representing armies, divisions, corps, at the symbols showing German resistance collapsing but not yet broken. "It has to be," Churchill says. "We're too close to victory to let pride destroy us now." March 22, 1945. Patton issues the written apology. It's brief, formal, and carefully worded. "My remarks regarding tactical aggressiveness were misconstrued as criticism of Field Marshal Montgomery's operational planning. I have the utmost respect for the Field Marshal's leadership and the courage of British forces under his command. Any suggestion otherwise was unintended and regrettable." His statement is equally formal. "I accept General Patton's clarification and consider the matter closed. Allied unity remains our paramount objective as we approach final victory." Privately, Montgomery tells his chief of staff, "Eisenhower made him do it, but at least he did it." Privately, Patton writes to his wife, "Had to apologize to Monty today. Stuck in my throat like a fishbone. But Winston made a point I couldn't argue with. History is watching. Damn if that doesn't change everything." The two generals never became friends. Their tactical philosophies remained opposed, but they never publicly clashed again. Montgomery's Rhine crossing, Operation Plunder, launched on March 23rd and 24th with 250,000 troops. It succeeded, with casualties far below projections, about 3,500. Remarkable for an operation of that size. The massive preparation, the overwhelming force, the methodical advance, all of it worked exactly as Montgomery planned. Patton sent a private telegram to Montgomery the next day. "Well done. Wish I'd had 250,000 troops. I'd have been in Berlin by now." Montgomery reportedly laughed when he read it. He didn't reply. Churchill's words at that meeting revealed something crucial about coalition warfare. Winning battles is easy compared to managing egos. The Prime Minister understood that Patton and Montgomery weren't really fighting about tactics. They were fighting about legacy, about who would be remembered as the architect of victory, about whose name would be written largest in the history books. By reframing the conflict as a threat to both their legacies, Churchill found the only leverage that worked. Years later, in his memoirs, Montgomery reflected on that meeting. Churchill was right, of course. Patton and I were so busy competing with each other that we nearly forgot we were supposed to be competing with the Germans. The Prime Minister's rebuke was harsh but necessary, and though I'd never admitted to George, he was right too. I was cautious. But caution kept British soldiers alive when we couldn't afford to lose any more. Patton never wrote about the incident directly, but in a letter to his wife dated March 23, 1945, he wrote, "Had a meeting with Monty and Winston today. The PM reminded me that history judges intentions as harshly as actions. Damn if he isn't right. Sometimes the hardest enemy to defeat is yours." The alliance held. Germany surrendered 6 weeks later, on May 8, 1945. The final push into Germany succeeded because of Montgomery's methodical preparation and Patton's aggressive exploitation, two opposite philosophies that together crushed the Third Reich. Churchill's words at that meeting never made it into official records. The transcript was classified. The participants rarely spoke of it, but both generals carried those words to their graves. When Patton died in December 1945, just months after the war ended, killed in a car accident in Germany, Montgomery attended the memorial service. He stood in the back, in civilian clothes, unnoticed by most of the attendees. When asked later why he came, Montgomery said simply, "Because we won." And he was part of that. When Montgomery died in 1976, among his personal papers was a single telegram, framed, hanging in his study. It was Patton's message from March 1945, "Well done. Wish I'd had 250,000 troops. I'd have been in Berlin by now." Montgomery had kept it for 31 years. The lesson of that meeting in Reims isn't about tactics or strategy. It's about something more fundamental. Wars are won by nations, not individuals. Victories belong to coalitions, not commanders. And history remembers not just what you accomplished, but how you accomplished it, and who you hurt along the way. Churchill understood that. Eisenhower understood that. Eventually, even Patton and Montgomery understood that. And that understanding, more than any battle or crossing or advance, is what held the alliance together long enough to win the war. If this story fascinated you, if you learned something new about the hidden conflicts that shaped World War II, then do me a favor. Subscribe to WW2 Elite. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments, who do you think was right, Patton or Montgomery? Were Patton's aggressive tactics the key to victory, or was Montgomery's caution what kept the alliance alive? I read every comment, and your insights make this channel better. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.